What's up, Brozones? Welcome to the Ozone and welcome to another FNAF audiobook. Today we are reading through Lonely Freddy, which is in the second Fazbear Frights book, and I guess a lot of you guys watching right now are going to have a lot of questions as to why this is being uploaded in 2025. Basically, I did the entire Fazbear Frights audiobook series, but I did miss out two stories, and those were Lonely Freddy and Out of Stock. I believe I actually started both of them, but I never finished. So that's what I'm here doing today. It is very random, again, because this was literally 5 years ago when this book came out. I think it was February 2020 this book came out. I might be completely wrong about that, but this was a while ago. So, and these are two pretty good stories. I wouldn't say they are top tier, but I hope you're excited for them. Nevertheless, I think this one's got a very good ending. So, let's get straight into Lonely Freddy. If you are watching because I haven't uploaded in a month, then I just want to update you. There will be more uploads, more frequently, more in 2025. Don't worry, I am on it. I am doing content in the background, and I'm working on videos, and I'm also doing loads of audiobooks so that I can finish all of the series that I started. That is my aim for 2025. So let's do it. Okay, starting with Lonely Freddy. Let's get into it. Apologies for these highlights, by the way. These are when I first read the book in 2020, and I was highlighting everything and anything that I thought was lore relevant. Okay. Bad, Alec had always argued, was such a subjective word. With its very definition, it was determined by someone else's baseline. It was a word that served one purpose: to judge. And Alec had been judged his entire life. His first memory was a decidedly terrible one. He was in preschool and bigger than the other kids. Recognizing this advantage at an early age, he found he could move to the front of any line with surprising ease. The other kids were glad to play the games he dictated, and he never had to look for a seat at the lunch table. It was only when his preschool teacher pulled him to the side on that first memorable day that Alec was made to understand that he was bad. "You're a bully," the teacher had said to him, a word he assumed was positive and smiled when she offered it. Instead of patting him on the shoulder like his mum would do when he ate his whole meal, the teacher shrank away from him in horror. In fact, it was that precise expression on his preschool teacher's face that Alec remembered most of all. More than the way the blue plastic chairs in the classroom would stick to the backs of his legs in summertime. More than the way a fresh box of unused crayons smelled under his nose. More than the way the canned peaches they served as snacks slid around on his tongue amid the sticky syrup and metallic aftertaste. Alec didn't even remember his preschool teacher's name. He simply remembered her look of horror when he didn't understand that he was bad. As he grew older, Alec came to realize that bad was defined by comparison, and that was mostly a workable construct for Alec, until Hazel came along. So starting out very philosophical, and I really, if anybody has already read this story and you're just listening with me, first of all, hi, thank you so much, that means a lot to me. Secondly, this first page is quite interesting knowing the full story. I never noticed this. Hazel, who was named after a beloved grandmother Alec had never met. Hazel, whose fine blonde ringlets were twisted up in stiff bows. Hazel, who slept through the entire night with nary a fuss. Alec was named after no one. It was a compromise between the Alexander his mum had wanted and the Eric his dad had lobbied for. Alec's curls were unruly, tamed with water from the tap and a wooden-backed brush. Alec's nights were cleaved by nightmares and bouts of loud wakefulness. For the first 5 years of his life, Alec's behaviour was more or less in constant search of the wall separating good from bad. After Hazel was born, Alec jumped the wall and landed in uncharted lands. He was not as easily tracked in this new space. He was bad sometimes, yes, but more often than not, he was boundless. He went undiscovered. It was in that space that good and bad didn't exist. If there was no one guiding him to the boundaries, if there was no one watching, behaviour, if anything, was an afterthought. Maybe don't single him out as often, Meg, Alec's aunt Gigi would say. Kids respond so much better to positive reinforcement. Aunt Gigi had also suggested to Alec's mom in that same conversation that she switch to organic milk. The added hormones in regular dairy increased aggression in kids, according to some studies. Aunt Gigi had no children and no desire for any. Alec's mom was often in the mood for advice, and her older sister was always happy to give it. Gigi, it's not the milk, Alec's mom had argued. They drink the same milk, and he's not aggressive. He's just, I don't know. He's in his own world. It's like the rules don't apply to him. Well, then you'll know he'll be a leader when he's older. That's great, Aunt Gigi had posited. Yeah, Alec's mom had said. Maybe. I don't know. He doesn't seem to like other people much. He's 10, Meg. They hate everyone. Not everyone, his mum had argued. Look at Gavin. Who? Becca's son. That kid who's always smiling at everyone? That isn't a bad thing, his mum had said. No, it's a creepy thing, Aunt Gigi had said. Trust me, you don't want more little Gavins running around the world. That's the kind of kid you find standing over your bed one night holding a butcher knife. No thanks. It was times like those that Alec wondered if he'd been born to the wrong sister, and Aunt Gigi was really his mum. But his turned-up nose and blonde hair like hay were dead ringers for his mum, no question. It was also times like these that Alec wished he wasn't so good at eavesdropping. His parents had both warned him about it many times, but inevitably, he'd find himself perched at the top of the staircase, listening to the conversations no one really tried that hard to hide. It was almost like they wanted him to hear. Eavesdropping was how he'd found out about the plan. Alec probably should have seen it coming. It was April, after all, the magical miracle month, otherwise known as the month their precious Hazel was born. Alec got a day, the 18th day of August, to be precise. That was his special day when his parents pretended he wasn't a problem. But Hazel got a full 30 days of adoration. Someone's got a special day coming up in 2 weeks, his dad would say. Are you ready for your party? His mum would ask. And Hazel's eyes would glitter, and she'd act like it was all too much fuss, and his parents would eat it up. She'd earned it, they would say. She would enjoy it. Then they'd look at Alec and wait for him to agree, which he rarely did. Why bother? It's not like it would change a thing. She'd still get the party. Maybe it would have been decent of him to be nice to Hazel once in a while, but Alec just couldn't see giving his parents the satisfaction. I think looking into this from like a FNAF perspective, this does really have some reminiscent themes of like Michael Afton and The Crying Child. You've got an older brother who's like who's a bully, essentially. There you go. It's a bully older brother story, and there are plenty of those sort of stories in Fazbear Frights that you'll come across. But like, I feel like this one is very reminiscent of that, especially with like, I think here that paragraph just now was kind of implying that Alec knows, and he feels like he could have been nice to his sister, but like why it wouldn't change anything. And I feel like that is quite reminiscent of Michael, because Michael isn't a bad person. He's not one of those people to wake up. Or not one of those people to stand over your bed with a butcher knife, as they were describing. That would be more on the William side, I would say. But like, Michael is a bully, right, like there. But yeah, I don't know. After like the whole Bite of 83, he kind of gets his redemption arc, I guess. That's just a very quick and short analysis of kind of what themes and parallels there could be here, maybe. Anyway, I won't keep stopping too often, but I like to have a little conversation every once and then. You guys know that probably best. So, when he overheard... Oh, I've already read this, but when he overheard his parents discussing the plan, he was frankly surprised it had taken them this long to come up with it. They must have been behind on their reading. It's in chapter 5. Have you gotten to chapter 5 yet? Alec's mom asked his dad across the kitchen table where they stirred their decaf coffee that night. I thought chapter 5 talked about letting the child choose his own road, his dad said. That tone of exasperation in his voice was becoming more of a regular thing. No, that's from Glowing Child, corrected his mom. I'm talking about the plan planner. This doctor says the Glowing Child's theories are all wrong. Alec remembered the Glowing Child method pretty well. Apparently that author believed every child was simply a blob of clay waiting to be self-molded, which involved some completely bonkers exercises like letting Alec rename himself. So he decided on Captain Thunderpants and spent the entire week farting himself around the house and claiming he couldn't help it. It was his namesake. That's giving me some neuroplasticity vibes. That wasn't as ridiculous as the time they read that they needed to plant a garden with him so he could nurture something, or the time they were told to go camping as a family to get back to their familial core. The garden experiment ended when Alec buried his mom's wedding ring in the soil to see if it would grow more diamonds. The camping trip devolved into a sort of Lord of the Flies situation after Hazel got a mosquito stuck up her nose, and Alec may or may not have convinced her that it would lay eggs in her nasal passage. The trip really didn't have a chance after that. Honestly, Meg, the more we read, the more I'm convinced that none of these so-called doctors know what the heck they're talking about, his dad said. But Alec's mom was not one to be deterred. Well, Ian, what's the alternative? Do we give up? This wasn't the first time Alec had heard a conversation like this one. It seemed to happen in the spaces between every other book that his parents would read to try to understand why their son was just so different than them. It wasn't the first time Alec had heard this sort of conversation, and yet it would form the same hard stone in his stomach every single time. Because no matter how many books they read, or gardens that made him plant, or organic milk they poured down his throat, the one thing they never tried was talking to him. Of course, we don't give up, his dad said to his mom, whipping his little teaspoon around the sides of his coffee mug until Alec imagined it forming a little decaf whirlpool against the ceramic. Just ask me, Alec whispered, and for just a second, for once in all his 15 years, his parents were both silent, and he thought maybe they'd hear him. Just ask me what's the matter. If they'd asked, he might have said, I'm not like you, and I'm not like Hazel, and that should be okay. But his parents simply went on talking. You just need to skip ahead to chapter 5, his mum said. Can't we just skip ahead to the part where you tell me what we're supposed to be doing? His dad said. Just read the chapter, Ian. The party's next weekend, and I really think we need to lay some groundwork before Saturday. His dad sighed so heavily, Alec could hear it from the stairs, which is how he knew that his dad would once again read a useless book about some useless method for helping them to understand their enigma of a child. It was the same every time. And because his parents always stashed their collection of parenting books in some super secret location Alec had never been able to discover, he'd be starting from a disadvantage like always, watching The Plan and Chapter 5's contents unfold over the course of the next week. Upstairs in the Jack and Jill bathroom that separated Alec's room from Hazel's, he stared in the mirror and tried to see himself the way his parents did. They saw the same blonde hair, the same light green eyes, the same jaw set in rigid determination to never hang open in amazement, to never break into an unexpected smile. Alec was nothing if not deliberate. It was only Hazel who occasionally took him by surprise. Are you okay? She asked from her doorway, and he fixed his face in annoyance. But he was a little too late in doing so, and he was afraid she'd seen him startled. Why wouldn't I be? He asked, levelling her with the same type of question he always asked. He had mastered the art of deflection. Hazel shrugged and grabbed her toothbrush, playing at being nonchalant too, but she wasn't nearly as good at it as he was. "Mom and Dad are acting weird again," she said, shorthand for the explanation. She meant, "Mom and Dad are picking on you again." But Alec wasn't so easily fooled. His sister was the worst of them. She conned everyone else with her questions that pretended to be innocent, and her smile that might have made anyone else think she meant it. "Don't worry," he said. "It won't affect your party." He'd meant for it to be a slight on her, but she misunderstood and thought he actually cared. "I don't really care that much about the party, you know," she said, looking at his reflection in the mirror instead of looking directly at him. That's how he knew she was lying. She started to brush her teeth, and Alec took a moment to study her as she looked down into the sink to spit. It's almost like she was able to will every part of herself to be correct. Or perfect, sorry. Her hair never frizzled. Her hair never frizzed. Not frizzled. Her nose never ran. Her freckles were evenly spaced as though they'd been painted on by a steady hand. Even her teeth were straight. She'd probably never need braces. Alec had started to believe he'd never get his braces off. "Don't be dumb," he finally said. "Of course you care about your stupid party." Her face flushed, a perfectly even shade of pink. "I bet not that many people will even come," she said. Alec couldn't even muster a response to such a ridiculous plea for fake sympathy. He just snorted. "Yeah, okay," he said, and left her to finish swishing the toothpaste from her mouth. The day of getting his own bathroom in his own house with his own rules and no one to wonder why he was so different than them, that day couldn't come soon enough. Stars had begun to dot the sky when Alec's trance was broken by the creak of the bathroom door on Hazel's side. He waited for the interruption to pass, but the longer he waited, the more it became clear that Hazel wasn't in there to go to the bathroom. After another few seconds, the door to his room from the bathroom opened a crack, and in spilled the blonde curls of his sister as she broke a cardinal rule. "Get out," he said, and he snatched her head back into the bathroom, startled. But that didn't last. Instead, she opened the door a little wider, and to Alec's utter disbelief, she dared to take a step inside his room. He watched her look around for a second, as though she'd entered a strange new world, and in a way, she had. If he'd ever suspected that she snuck in here when he wasn't around, that question was answered by the way she stared around her now. She was a rule follower, even when no one was looking. "You have a death wish," he said, and he could hear her swallow. Still, she took another step toward him. He had a couple of options. The usual verbal intimidation wasn't working. He could use brute force. Pain was an excellent motivator. He could play at charging her, whip the covers off of himself, and lunge out of the bed just far enough to chase her off. Or he could exercise psychological trickery. Ooh, psychological trickery, you say, huh? He could lie there perfectly still, saying not even a single word more. He could watch her as closely as he was watching her now, wait for her to get close, to achieve whatever insane goals she must have for coming in here and defying all logic, and watch her courage falter the deeper she ventured into his room. Maybe it was the thrill of exerting that level of control over the situation, or maybe he was curious to see what she'd do. Either way, he opted for the third option, and he waited. Strangely, for as closely as he studied her, Hazel studied him just as closely back. She took another step towards his bed, then another, and though he could tell she was trembling, could see that from the second she popped her head in, she continued to walk forward. It wasn't until she was just a couple steps from his bed that he noticed she was holding something. She took the last 2 steps fast, as though her courage was expiring, and set the thing at the foot of Alec's bed. Then she took 2 steps backward, spinning on her heel, and sprinted back into the bathroom, pulling the door to his bedroom closed behind her. Alec stared at the book at the foot of his bed for a long time before he finally picked it up. It was green with bold white lettering, the title precisely centered and slightly raised from the jacket. It was flagged with a bright pink sticky note right at the start of Chapter 5, and when he opened it, written in the fine pencil script of his mother's careful hand, were notes for his dad and her to follow in the days leading up to Golden Hazel's party. Defying their parents, defying all logic and rules and self-interest, Hazel had stolen the plan planner from their parents' secret library while they slept, and she had shared it with them. Alec's heart raced as he read through the carefully prescribed steps of Chapter 5, the method that promised to turn their bad child good and achieve the familial harmony his parents had read over and over was achievable. Then, when he was done thumbing through the pages his father hadn't yet bothered to read but had agreed to try out on their problematic firstborn, Alec stared at the closed bathroom door his sister had gathered the courage to open, knowing the wrath she'd surely incur. He wondered for the rest of the night about why she had done it. What sort of game was she playing at? What kind of sorcery was she practicing? Trying to lull him in a false sense of camaraderie. Camaraderie. Then he allowed his memory to fall backward. He retraced the times he had confused her in the past, the moments he had simply assumed she was attempting to throw him off his game. There was the time she baked him cookies in her toy oven after his parents had ignored his pleas for sweets at the grocery store. There was that one moment during the doomed camping trip when she had laughed at an unintentional joke he'd made, even as she clawed desperately at her nose for the rogue mosquito. There was that one Mother's Day when she'd added his name to the card because he'd forgotten. Alex stared out his window for the rest of the night, until the dotted stars gave way to the blue dawn before sunrise. It was too tempting to believe that his sister had brought him the book because an alliance had suddenly seemed like a good idea. 10 years of watching the uncanny spells she could cast on his parents and the rest of the world had taught him she wasn't to be so easily trusted. No, he thought as night crept into day, this is just another trick. She'd been able to fool everyone else but him up to this point. A phony peace offering wasn't about to trick him into thinking she was suddenly on his side. Still, it unsettled him a little that he didn't know exactly what she was up to. There was really only one way to solve that mystery. I'll play along, he whispered to himself. She'll show her cards eventually. Sorry if there are brief pauses every now and then. I just need to drink so that I can keep talking. You're making it too complicated, Hazel said. It seemed she was talking to this new alliance with surprising comfort. They were sitting by the pool in the backyard, their feet dangling in the chlorinated water as the sun beat against their backs. Alex didn't need a mirror to know his neck was starting to glow pink. What are you talking about? It's the perfect plan, he said. Alec was in such habit of coldly dismissing his sister. It was exceptionally difficult to pretend to take her seriously. But if he was going to discover whatever trap it was she was trying to lure him into, he had to be convincing. Strangely though, in pretending to take her advice, he was starting to see her differently. It was weird the way this person he was so closely related to was suddenly becoming whole in front of him, like he'd been living with a hologram this whole time. She was a completely formed con artist. So, let me get this straight, she said, rolling her eyes skyward. Your big plan to get Mum and Dad to stop thinking you're a total sociopath is to act like a total sociopath. After reading Chapter 5 the night before, Alec learned that the plan was a grossly simplistic take on the teenaged brain. If parents wanted a well-behaved, predictable child, they simply needed to treat them as the opposite of that. It was the worst in hokey reverse psychology, and nothing irked Alec more than having his intelligence insulted. So, his counterplan was simple. He'd just act worse. Way, way worse. He was pretending, of course. He knew his counterplan was a terrible one. But he needed Hazel to be the one to come up with the idea, not him. It was the only way to make her believe he was falling for her gesture of sibling love. Once her guard was down, he'd be able to figure out what she was actually up to. How am I the sociopath in this scenario? He asked, trying hard not to actually feel offended. It's just an act, he reminded himself. It's just an act. They think the best way to make me good is to treat me like I'm bad, Alec added in mock outrage. If you ask me, that's pretty sociopathic. Now, he was fake arguing that fake acting bad was the best way to counteract his parents' fake anger at his real bad behaviour. It was all getting very meta. Alec could feel a headache forming behind his eyes. Look, said Hazel, suddenly sounding older than her almost 10 years. Don't take this the wrong way, but you've sort of been losing your touch. My touch? Alec said, putting his hand on the hottest part of his neck to try and shield it. Only yesterday, Hazel would have been terrified to be this blunt with him. Maybe he really was losing his knack for intimidation. You used to be pretty good at hiding it, she said, and she looked hard at him, so he knew she was waiting for him to catch on. When he didn't answer, she sighed and said, You used to get away with a lot more. How's that my fault? He said, not really liking the way he sounded pouty. If anything, it's your fault. She blinked at him slowly. They only started to think I was the bad one when they figured out you were the good one. Hazel looked back down at the water, and this time he thought maybe he saw something of the old Hazel, the one who seemed to tiptoe around him with an apology on her lips, like it was a lost cause thinking they'd ever be friends. To Alec's great amazement, he felt a twinge of remorse for that, a feeling he quickly buried. Okay, what's your counterplan? He asked. Her solution was too simple. Be good, she said. Alec laughed. What else could he do? That's your masterclass in That's your masterclass in playing our parents? Reverse psychology? She shrugged. If you're a little bit better, and I'm a little bit worse, maybe it will neutralize the attention enough for them to leave us alone for a change. Alec let his jaw do that thing where it dropped. He let his body experience the full shock he had restrained for so long, and he did it in front of the least likely person, Golden Hazel. The child who did what she was told when she was told to do it. The straight A's and the coordinated piano fingers, the dish clearer and the classroom helper, the easy parent-teacher conference, the perfect child. Maybe she didn't want to be perfect anymore. How had it occurred to him that his lot in the family was just as burdensome as hers? Why had the tiny sparkle in her eye never caught his attention? The one that said, let's trade places for today. When had she stopped being Golden Hazel and simply started being Hazel, a kid? All the more reason not to trust her, he thought, his resolve hardening. She was tired of pretending to be the good one. She was ready to advance to the full bad kid status, which meant she was definitely up to something. Do you think you can do it? He asked, not meaning it as a challenge, but as an actual question. Be bad? Can you be good? She asked, and from her, it definitely was a challenge. They agreed to test her theory that night as a sort of trial run. Their parents were obviously committed to their own experiment prescribed by the plan planner. They'd been on Alec's case all day. They'd scolded him for failing to pull his clothes from the clothesline. They'd admonished him for playing video games before completing his homework, even though it was spring break. They'd even lectured him on the importance of flossing, a strange battle to pick after a spotless checkup during his most recent dental cleaning. By the time dinner rolled around, Alec's face hurt from smiling. His neck was sore from nodding. His blood had boiled so many times that day he was surprised he hadn't cooked from the inside out. He'd swallowed every scolding, never caving to the temptation of sassing his parents. And, true to her word, at each confrontation throughout the day, Hazel had been there to take a portion of the burden away from Alec. She'd chosen, that morning, to show their mom the less than stellar grade on her spelling test from the previous week. She'd accidentally dropped her dad's shirts in the mud when she pulled them from the clothesline. And in response to the great flossing debate of Monday afternoon, she'd marked a first for herself. Hazel mouthed off. How many cavities did you have at your last checkup? She muttered, within earshot of their mother. Young lady, what's gotten into you today? Their mum said. And as Alec and Hazel rounded the corner to retreat to their separate bedrooms after dinner time, they'd tapped fingertips and hid their smiles. But as soon as Alec closed his own bedroom door, he reviewed every moment from the day to analyse his sister's actions. The way she'd jump in too readily to deflect the scolding meant for him. The way she'd been so ready with a smart comeback to their mum. The time she winked conspiratorially at him at the dinner table. It was all just a little too perfect. This little show she was putting on for him. You're not clever enough to play this game, he thought that night before he went to bed. You're in way over your head, sis. He had 5 years on her of playing the role of the bad seed. If she thought she was going to usurp that title, I don't know what that word means, usurp that title, she was in for a rude awakening. Usurp. What does usurp mean? The next day was more or less a repeat of the previous one. When their parents decried Alec's lack of manners at the breakfast table, Hazel burped. When Alec's dad accused him of scratching the side of the car with his bike, Hazel unapologetically took the blame. When Alec's mum wondered aloud when the last time was that Alec had ingested a vegetable, Hazel's quick response was to ask when the last time was that their parents had cooked an edible one. That night, as Hazel joined Alec on his perch at the top of the stairs, they listened to their parents puzzle through the last 2 days. Is it just me, or does Hazel seem to be going through a phase? Their mum whispered to their dad, teaspoons clinking against the sides of their coffee mugs. I thought it was just my imagination at first, their dad agreed. Their parents' awe was unmistakable. Did you hear what she said to me this afternoon? Their mum asked. She actually said she thought I was starting to look haggard. Haggard, Ian? Do I look haggard? No, but you sound haggard, Alec muttered. Hazel had to stifle her laugh, but Alec was too irritated to find the humour. His parents were infuriating. Was it really so unbelievable that Hazel could be even nastier than predictably rotten Alec? Well, could anyone blame you for being haggard? Their father said. Oh, wrong answer, Hazel whispered, and this time Alec did find the humour, and his laugh caught him off guard. So then I do look haggard, their mum said, and Alec could hear a teaspoon clinging faster and faster against the ceramic. One of them was compulsively stirring. Of course not. Meg, can we try to focus on the kids? He said, and their mum let out a single, uncharitable ha! Oh, now look who's ready to be the adult, said their mum, and Alec and Hazel both leaned back on their step, grimacing. That's not going to go over well, said Alec. Really, Meg? I just think that... Oh, I know what you think. You've made that pretty clear. Grief, Ian, grow up. But when Alec looked over at Hazel, she was simply smiling, as though the whole thing were going exactly according to plan. Of course, from her perspective, it was. Then she turned her smile to him. If Alec hadn't been able to see right through her, he might have been tempted to believe it was genuine. If he were the type to fall for such an obvious manipulation, he might have even felt a hint of warmth toward her. A sister simply in search of an actual relationship with her brother. It was kind of cute, he thought, how she believed she could outsmart him. Okay, their dad said, and Alec heard him pull in a deep breath. We can't turn on each other, their mother sighed. Mother, you're right. Let's just go to bed. It's been a long day. Oh, and I can't find the book, FYI. Forget it, their dad said. We'll look for it in the morning. 2 sets of chair legs scraped against the kitchen tiles, and Alec and Hazel jumped to their feet and slipped into their rooms just as the light on the stairs switched on, announcing their parents' approach. Lying in bed, Alec thought through all of the variations in his own plan, the counter to the counter plan, as it were. Tomorrow was party planning day. Tomorrow was another day. He'd heard his mum remind his dad about it 1,000 times. Not that it mattered, since he'd be at work and she would be dragging Alec and Hazel down along to meet Aunt Gigi at the pizzeria instead. It was there that Alec would really ramp up his reconnaissance. If he was going to discover what Hazel were actually up to, he would discover it in the place where all of these plans and counterplans were to culminate. He could think of no other reason for why Hazel was so determined to sabotage her own birthday party by allowing Alec to be, well, himself. It had something to do with their birthday on Saturday. Whatever she was planning, it would all go down then. Alec's only real option was to sit back and let Hazel show her cards. It was a matter of time before it happened, and though she'd proven herself more cunning than he'd originally given her credit for, she was no evil genius. That title was reserved for Alec. Sometime after Alec heard his parents' bedroom door shut for the night, the door from the bathroom he shared with Hazel opened, and she poked her head inside. "Today was fun," she said, and Alec made a quick switch to his conspiring brother act. "Yeah," he said. "Nice job with the cooking dig," he said. "Thanks." Hazel laughed shyly. "Oh, please," Alec thought, but he managed to keep from rolling his eyes. "Hey, you don't think we're gonna, break them or anything, do you?" Hazel said. "Nah," he said. "They can handle it. Trust me, I've put them through a lot worse." Hazel nodded, then gave him one more shy smile before shutting the door and padding across the bathroom back to her own room. It was a few minutes before Alec noticed that he was smiling too. Not smiling because he was recounting all the ways he'd beaten his sister at their own game. Not smiling because he'd exposed her for the fraud she is for their parents and friends and everyone else in the world to see. Not yet, anyway. He was smiling because he was enjoying her company. "Get a grip, Alec," he scolded himself. Then he repeated to himself over and over that she wasn't as good as she pretended to be, that she was only using him as a means to an end. He reminded himself that this alliance was false and temporary, that once he'd revealed her as a fraud, they'd go back to their separate ends of the bathroom, and Alec could proceed unfettered in whatever it was he was going to do, only this time without the constant comparison to Golden Hazel. Then he wiped that pathetic smile from his face and fell asleep with vengeance on his mind. I find it interesting they keep bringing up the nickname Golden Hazel, almost like they're trying to say something, like Golden Hazel, Golden Freddy. I don't know. Because I've read this story before. Obviously, I think I've read it 2 or 3 times. I can't remember the exact number of times I've read it, but back in the day, I used to read this over and over. I used to read the books a few times in order to get a good understanding of all of the content in it, because I love these books. They are so good. And I never actually put together that maybe that's adding to this sort of, I don't want to say parallel, because people snark at that word, but it is almost like an extra theme that's added onto this this like Michael the Crying Child debacle. I don't know. Golden Hazel. That's interesting. Might be something to look into. I don't know. Gigi, what do you think? Should we kick in for the extra Fazbear Fun Witches? Oh god. Alec and Hazel's mum was a wreck on Wednesday. She'd overslept her alarm and had to shove Alec and Hazel into the car without taking a shower or even brushing her teeth. Her hair was jammed into submission under an old baseball cap, and the dark circles under her eyes made her look almost skeletal under the shadow of the hat brim. Hazel hadn't made it much better by asking her, in her most concerned voice, if she was coming down with something because she looked absolutely sickly. And Alec hadn't made it any better by being nice. "You look fine, Mum," he'd said, which threw their mum for such a loop she could only blink at them both before snapping at them to buckle up and running 2 stop signs in order to meet Aunt Gigi on time at Freddy Fazbear's. Now she was standing in the party room with a thoroughly unenthused party prepper who was waiting impatiently on answers about Saturday. "What on earth is a fun witch?" Aunt Gigi asked, leaning her hand on a table and immediately lifting it after detecting something sticky. Their mum tried, but she was distracted by the sight of Alec and Hazel seeming to play together by the skee-ball machines. You are truly terrible at this game, Alec said. I am not, said Hazel, but after her third gutter ball in a row, Alec just laughed. Okay, it's not my best event, she said. I shine more in the pinball category. Can you even see over the controllers? He asked, rubbing the top of her head roughly. Hazel smiled, and so did Alec, but for a different reason. He felt refreshed after a good night's sleep, renewed in his mission to bring his sister down. It's a delicious crescent roll stuffed with your choice of fried macaroni, tater tots, or chocolate marshmallow, the party prepper deadpan to Aunt Gigi. That sounds utterly repulsive, Aunt Gigi said. The party prepper didn't argue. Yeah, but it's only $20 more, and honestly, I'm just not sure if the Super Sunrise party package comes with enough food, their mum fretted, finally taking the gaze from the kids and returning to the task at hand. So that's a yes on the Fazbear Funwich platter with extra dipping sauces, said the party prepper, by now having had just enough of this entire interaction. Yes, let's do it, said their mum, clearly relieved at having made the big decision. I have these coupons from the paper for Foxy's Pirate Palooza special. Can I use those? That's interesting. Does anybody who hasn't read this story yet and who doesn't have a clue on, does anybody reading this for the first time know where that's from? Let me know in the comments. I'll say the answer in 5 seconds. Okay, it's from the survival logbook. There is actually a coupon, throughout the survival logbook, I think there's 3 or 4 pages with just really random coupons. I know that one of them says happiest day, and it says the puppet will give you gifts, and it's 5 children or something like that. There's this really cool voucher for that one, or coupon, sorry. But then there is also one titled Foxy's Pirate Palooza, and I think that's a really cool detail that they added in there. Good world building, good connection as well. If we're connecting books to the games and stuff, although I guess the logbook is still a book, but it's set in the games universe. I don't know. While their mum and Aunt Gigi ironed out the last of the details, Alec and Hazel wandered the empty pizzeria out of earshot of their mum and aunt. So, what's the big deal with this place anyway? Alec said, worried he was giving himself away. The deep, dark truth was that he'd always wanted his own birthday party at Freddy Fazbear's, but he'd never made enough friends to justify the expense of a big party. Instead, his parents had always thrown together a haphazard celebration at home and called it a pool party. But it was hard to ignore the reality that the only other kids there were all Hazel's friends she'd been allowed to invite in order to fill out the crowd. Hazel shrugged, feigning nonchalance. I don't know. Liar, he said. You've had your birthday here for the last 4 years in a row. It was the perfect double psych out. He'd goad her into telling him what was so important about her stupid party this year, and she'd just think he was trying to have a brotherly conversation with her. Why don't you tell me? She challenged, catching Alec mid-stare. He hadn't realised what he was looking at until Hazel did. Then he quickly looked away. Nice try, she said, tilting her head toward the Yarg Foxy on stage. There he was, in all his piratey foxy greatness. This eye-patched, peg-legged, hook-wielding orange fox. In this restaurant, he was positioned as a human-sized plush figure propped by the stage, presumably there for taking pictures with. But he played a different role in every Freddy Fazbear's, sometimes greeting visitors at the door, sometimes playing in the band on stage with the others. Wherever he was, though, Alex saw him. He was without a doubt Alec's favourite character. It's possible that he used to stick his foot in a plastic flower pot and roll a cardboard tube around his hand and pretend to be Yarg Foxy. Clearly, it was also possible that Hazel had at some point silently witnessed said roleplay. This story is so comedic. Whatever, he said. Stupid kid stuff. And besides, we're talking about you, not me. They were standing in the aisle between the arcade and the stage now. Alec eyed the platform where Freddy Fazbear and all his friends performed animatronic routines. He was always a little unsettled by the way their robotic bodies were eerily still after the show, while the rest of the restaurant chimed with the clinks and buzzes of the games. He backed away from the stage unconsciously, and was only aware that he'd moved when the back of his heel hit something. He turned to find himself uncomfortably close to a raised platform holding a smaller version of the bear on stage, only this bear had an unlit sign over its head that read, "Lonely Freddy." It was a weird name for a toy, but the weirdest parts of it were hardest to define. The bear stood stiff, almost at attention. Its eyes stared straight ahead at the stage, but Alec had the strangest feeling that it was still watching him. "Maybe I want this year to be different," Hazel said, and Alec jumped a little at her voice. He'd gotten so lost in the staring Freddy that he forgot she was standing right there. "So what? You want more presents?" he asked. "You know you're going to get everything you want anyway," he said, and this time he let a little of the venom escape. He couldn't help it. How ungrateful could she be? He was the one who nobody liked, who had to fight for everything, who was constantly misunderstood. "There's some stuff even Mum and Dad can't do," she said, and if Alec was starting to crack, Hazel was too. He could see her getting a little defensive. "Trust me, for you, they'll move mountains." Hazel frowned at him. "They try, you know." "Yeah, they try for you." She set her jaw. "The only reason they do so much stuff for me is because they feel so guilty for worrying so much about you. Do you have any idea how much time Dad spent planning that camping trip?" Alex did know, as a matter of fact. He'd listened to them from the top of the stairs as they'd orchestrated every detail of the trip in order to keep Alec calm, like he was some sort of bomb that they had to keep from going off. His eyes drifted again to the bear. Alec got the strangest sensation, like he wanted to move their argument elsewhere. Lonely Freddy, Alec thought to himself, more like nosy Freddy. Hazel put her hands on her hips. "I bet you didn't even know they moved here for you." "What are you talking about?" Alec said, genuinely confused. His guard was slipping, but this was a turn in events he hadn't been expecting. "The only reason we live here instead of our old house is because this one's closest to Aunt Gigi, and they think you like her more than you like them because she understands you," she said, twitching her fingers into quotes. "Well," Alex said, unable to argue, "he did like his aunt better than his parents. Don't you think maybe that hurt their feelings a little bit?" she said. "For you to like Mom's sister better? What was going on here? Where was all this anger coming from?" Alec was so confused. Hazel was acting like him. "If they're so great and I'm so evil," Alec said, losing all sight of his counter plan, "then why are you helping me and not them?" Of all moments to clam up, Hazel did just that. She recovered her facade faster than Alec did, which only worked to infuriate Alec more. She'd somehow managed to gain the upper hand despite his 5 years of experience on her. "Hazel! Hazel, where are you?" Hazel's green eyes stopped boring a hole through Alec long enough to call to their mum. "Coming!" She turned on her heel and trotted around the corner toward the party room, leaving Alec in the company of the eavesdropping Freddy. "What are you looking at?" he snarled at the bear, and he had to suppress a chill, because he swore he'd seen a reflection in the bear's eyes, almost like a flash. "Creeper," he said to it, before loping down the same path his sister had seconds before. The party prepper was back with another question, and the mum had reached peak decision burnout. "Hazel, sweetie, do you want to have a chance at the wind tunnel?" She indicated to the large tube-like enclosure with the words "wind tunnel" formed into the shape of a tornado above the contraption. Inside there were scraps of paper and confetti left over from the last party. There were game tickets and free toy coupons and glittery strips of cellophane confetti stuck to the inside of the tube. "I don't care," she said, but it was such an obvious lie. Alec wasn't fooled, and neither was their mum. "But honey, you could have a chance at winning a Yarg Foxy. Isn't that what you want?" "Wait, What? Alex said, utterly betrayed. He couldn't help it. It was the ultimate betrayal. Alec had never seen Hazel's face turn that shade of red. Her entire face and neck looked practically scalded, as though she could feel his stare through the back of her head. She whipped around to confirm that Alec had been witness to the whole exchange. Oh, I saw, he thought. The one thing you knew I wanted. Okay, I'll bite, said Aunt Gigi, interjecting just in time to clue in all of the uninitiated. What's a Yarg Foxy? I love how Aunt Gigi's always like, what the hell is this Fazbear brand thing? I have to turn a light on. It's getting very dark in here. Where am I? The party prepper merely pointed to the top level of the prize shelf, a huge red sign proclaiming its prize, 10,000 tickets. It's that pirate fox, their mom said dismissively. Aunt Gigi walked over to the prize shelf to try to get a closer look. I don't get it, she said. The party prepper sighed. I don't either, their mom said, but kids go nuts for the thing. Hazel looked down at the ground, her ears scarlet. Does it do anything? Aunt Gigi said. It swings a hook, said their mom. Oh, then what's the thing that follows kids around? Said Aunt Gigi, directing her question to their mom. Huh? You know, Aunt Gigi said, snapping her fingers to try and trigger the memory. The bear, or whatever. Oh, right, their mom said, turning back to the party prepper, whose eyes were slow to leave her phone. Then, without answering their mum's question, the prepper turned a dial on her hip-clipped walkie-talkie and pressed a finger to the headset. Someone get Daryl to do a Lonely Freddy demo. They could hear the response from the headset even as she pressed it to her head. Daryl's on break. Daryl's on break. Over. The prepper released a sigh so long Alec wondered how she didn't pass out. Then, without a word, she crossed the restaurant toward a platform holding a familiar-looking toothed bear. The rest of them caught on after a minute and followed her like a little quail. The prepper bent her elbow and stationed her hand palm up toward the bear that looked identical to the one Alec had stared down between the stage and the arcade. Same stock straight posture. Same dead stare into the distance. This is Lonely Freddy, the party prepper began, reading a script from memory in a tone somewhere between apathy and contempt. Or contempt? Yeah, contempt. For some reason I thought that MPT was silent and it was just content. I don't know. At Freddy Fazbear's, we believe that no child should have to experience the wonder and delight of Freddy Fazbear's Family Pizzeria alone. Using patented technology and a touch of that Freddy Fazbear magic, your child can engage in a getting-to-know-you session with the bear. Freddy will learn all about your child's favourite things, just like a true friend. Aunt Gigi leaned close to their mom. Is it just me, or does Lonely Freddy sound like the cure for an unwanted kid? Gigi! Meg, seriously, it's a mechanical last resort. As in, no one wants to play with this kid, so here's a machine that'll do it instead. The party prepper, close enough to hear, lifted an eyebrow but didn't argue. Alec coughed and muttered, Losers. But it was such a terrible act. If there was ever a kid who would have been foisted onto a Lonely Freddy at a birthday party, it would have been Alec. He might have known that if he'd ever been invited to one. For the safety of your own children, we must ask that you refrain from climbing on, riding, or otherwise mistreating the Lonely Freddys. Parents and or guardians assume full responsibility for the health and welfare of their children in the presence of this proprietary technology. And with that, the party prepper's script came to a close, and she walked back toward the party room. The rest of them followed. The decision about the wind tunnel was still left unmade. The Lonely Freddy detour had done nothing to resolve the question at hand, and they were trying the party prepper's last ounce of already depleted patience. Aunt Gigi leaned into their mom and muttered, Can't you just buy the fox and skip the drama? What if she doesn't get the winning coupon in that wind contraption? Their mom looked frantic. It's not the same as winning it. Hazel overheard their debate, and although Alec could tell she was trying to play it cool, Hazel's eyes kept darting back to the top shelf of the prize counter where a brand new Yarg Foxy sat in his box, ready to be taken home underneath a bright red sign that said, "Win me in the wind tunnel." It was obvious she wanted the fox, so why was she pretending not to? Of course, all that mattered was that she wanted it. And when you don't get it, everyone's going to see you for the spoiled phony you are. Finally, Alec's counter plan was coming together. "Hazel, you should do the wind tunnel," he said to her in a voice carefully calibrated to just the right volume to be heard by both her and his mom. Aunt Gigi cocked her head at Alec, then leaned back into their mom. "Did you switch to the organic milk?" Their mother pinched the bridge of their nose like she did whenever she felt a migraine coming on, then turned to the party prepper. "Just add the wind tunnel to the package," she said. I love how every time Alec is actually nice and Hazel isn't nice, the mother can't do anything except get more and more of a headache. Which I guess that would happen, I guess, in real life. I mean, I'm not a parent, but I can't imagine how you would feel. Like, you would just be so confused, I think, if your children just kind of switched up on you like that. It must be really must be such a whiplash for such a good kid to suddenly go into this phase of doing loads of bad things and stuff. Man, that must be horrible. Back at home, Alec and Hazel kept up their new routine, with Alec playing the hero and Hazel playing the villain. Their mom pointedly ordered Alec to keep away from the freshly mopped kitchen floor, and Hazel responded by trekking across the tiles with muddy shoes. Their mom asked Alec to sort the recycling, and Hazel instead dumped the bottles and newspapers directly into the household garbage dumpster. "Hazel, what on earth has gotten into you?" Their mom finally broke, and Aunt Gigi watched in wide-eyed wonder as Hazel responded. "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, then scampered upstairs and slammed her bedroom door shut. Alec took a seat on his usual step at the top of the stairs. "It's like she's possessed," their mom said. "It's like she's 10, Aunt Gigi said, and Alec had to laugh because Aunt Gigi had no idea she was helping their little act along. The more their parents thought they were crazy, the more they'd be tempted to finally do away with all the parenting books and remember that Alec wasn't a problem to be solved, or in this case, he supposed, Hazel. "It's like they've switched places, Gigi. It's creepy," their mom said. "What's this?" Aunt Gigi said, but Alec couldn't see what she was referring to from his place on the stairs. "It's just this book," their mom said, the exhaustion in her voice making it clear she'd lost her faith in the planner. "Meg, you know I think it's great how you and Ian are always working to make sure you don't raise a couple of serial killers." "Thanks, Gigi," their mom said dryly. "Glad to know that our efforts are evident." "I mean it. I think you guys are really good parents," said Aunt Gigi. "I'm sensing a but in there somewhere," their mom said. "But don't you ever wonder if in all your efforts to make them normal kids, whatever that means, if we've what?" Their mom didn't sound so much defensive as petrified of the answer. "Maybe you've made them what they are," Aunt Gigi said, pausing for a moment before adding, "Hazel's the easy one. Alec is the hard one. It's like you put them on their own little islands." "Gigi, I love you," his mum said. "I'm sensing a but here," Aunt Gigi said. "But if one more person tells me how to raise my kids, I'm gonna scream," his mum said. To her credit, Aunt Gigi was silent after that. "I just want us to be a family. An actual family," Alec's mum said, and he thought she'd never sounded more tired than she did right then. "Congratulations," his Aunt Gigi said dryly. "You are one. As Alex stood to sneak off to his room, he heard his mom laugh at Aunt Gigi's joke, though there was really nothing funny about it. Just like Hazel, Alex's mom had everything she wanted, but she still wanted more. She wanted the perfect kids with the perfect manners in the perfect house. It wasn't enough for Hazel to have all the friends in the world and the most epic party every single year for her birthday. She had to have a stupid fox too. Why? Because it's the only thing she didn't have in her spoiled life. Well, Alec understood now. He saw his sister for the entitled fake Hazel she really was, and she'd done her level best to make him out to be the spoiled one. All so he wouldn't ruin her stupid special party day. Nice try, sis, he thought, and he could feel an outer shell harden around his rapidly beating heart. Nice try, but you're in for quite the surprise on party day. His counter plan was in full swing. Alec's parents were about to crack. Hazel had only been kidding that night. She asked if Alec thought they would break them, but it seems her question was rooted in at least little reality. They were barely holding it together by Thursday. Alec and Hazel had tormented them to within an inch of their life. Alec had brought home a pet wolf spider, and Hazel had set it free in their parents' bed. Alec helpfully ordered a pizza for dinner, but Hazel secretly added double anchovies under the cheese. A friendly game of charades initiated by Alec ended with their mum practically in tears as the word goat came up, and Hazel mimed, "What mum smells like." Friday was more of a blur, with their dad doing all he could to keep the peace the day before Hazel's party, even though neither of the parents were feeling particularly celebratory toward their golden Hazel. "It has to be hormonal or something," they could hear their dad say as Hazel and Alec eavesdropped from their perch at the top of the stairs. "She's probably nervous about making sure all her little friends have fun at the party." "Ian, I woke up last night to a spider the size of my palm crawling through my hair," their mom said, her voice wavering as she neared tears for the umpteenth time that week. "Oh man, I thought they found that yesterday," Alec whispered, and flinched as a stab of actual guilt hit his gut. "They did," Hazel said. I re-rescued it." Alec stared at the stranger he thought was his sister. His resolve toward exposing her may have doubled, but he couldn't deny he was genuinely impressed. He couldn't have thought up half the many disasters she'd set loose in their house over this past week. He found himself lamenting the return to their separate islands once this whole ruse was over. Regardless of the reasons or the double and triple crossing at play, he was going to miss her. He couldn't remember the last time he felt such a close camaraderie to his little sister. Maybe he couldn't remember because he'd never actually had one before. Saturday morning, their parents did something they hadn't done in years. They let Alec and Hazel sleep for as long as they wanted. Hazel woke up much earlier than Alec, but she chose to stay in her room, playing quietly until Alec finally got up at 9 o'clock. As soon as his bed springs creaked and he rose to sit on the edge of his bed, he heard Hazel's soft footsteps padding from her bedroom to his. The bathroom door creaked open and she entered his room with a casualness that would have been unheard of 7 days ago. "Big day," Alex said, studying her face for a reaction. He'd expected excitement, or smugness, or maybe even a twinge of guilt at all the torture they'd put their parents through. A sort of practice she wasn't accustomed to, no matter how much she had decided she wanted to be a little less golden. He didn't see any of that in her face, though. He saw the usual evenly spaced freckles, the wide, light green eyes, the perfect blonde ringlets that haloed her head. But there was something else. It was impossible to believe it was anything other than abject sadness. "You're about to get everything you want," he said, scrutinizing her. But she gave nothing away. "Yep," she said, though it was clear she didn't argue. It was clear she didn't agree. "You know, after this, you can probably go back to being nice, and they'll totally forgive you," he said. He, on the other hand, could go back to being his usual rotten self after this, and he'd receive 0 credit for having been decent to his family for the last week. Yeah, you're probably right, she said, taking a seat on the carpet beside his bed. As she started to pick at the lint in the rug, Alex started to wonder if that's what she wanted, to go back to being the good one. And he was surprised to find that regardless of what she wanted, that was what he wanted. All this plotting and counter-plotting was getting exhausting. He thought he could outplay his sister and protect his status as the bad egg, and maybe he still could. But what was it all for anyway? So he could keep himself exiled to his own little island in the house? Had it really been that bad hanging out with her for the last week? She started to stand up and walk towards the door, avoiding eye contact with Alec, and he found himself saying what he said next without even thinking. Happy birthday, he said, and this time she did turn to look at him, and she smiled. He thought it was real. He didn't want to think it was anything other than that. This morning had been very confusing. The party was all the barely controlled chaos it had been in previous years. Kids standing on chairs, rubbing balloons on one another's heads to create static. Parents calling out, "Where's Jimmy? Has anyone seen Jimmy?" Freddy Fazbear staff expertly sidestepping spilled orange drink and fielding requests for more ranch dressing. Amid the chaos, Alec could see 1 or 2 kids from the party walking around the restaurant with a 2-foot lonely Freddy in tow. It must have been cute if it hadn't been so creepy, watching this not quite tall but not quite short bear follow its friend around, listening and waiting for cues before acting autonomously. And Aunt Gigi's comment may have rung a little too true for Alec's comfort, but that day he saw that truth in all its baldness. The kids who played too rough, whose noses crusted around the nostrils, whose faces twisted into sour frowns, were the ones followed by the bears and no one else. Hazel wasn't quite the golden Hazel she'd been in previous years, but she was more or less back to her old self. She politely thanked her friends for buying her the gift she acted she wasn't expecting. She helped her mum pass cake around to the guests and her parents before taking a bite herself. She spent equal time with each kid who attended, making sure not to let anyone feel left out as they breezed from game to game in the arcade. Alex sat in the corner and played his role of the sulking teenaged older brother. By all rights, if he'd wanted one, he easily could have earned his own lonely Freddy. In a strange turn of events, his parents seemed relieved to see everything return to its normal, inadequate existence, whereas in previous years, they would have been urging him to go play with his sister, nudging him to smile, prodding him to help them drag the presents to the car. This year, they seemed just fine with allowing him to slouch in a chair and scowl at the partygoers. "I think it's all going pretty well, don't you?" his dad asked his mum and Aunt Gigi. "Did anyone remind the staff that Charlotte can't have chocolate? I should probably go remind them," his mum said. Charlotte can't have chocolate? Is that Charlotte Emily by any chance? It could be. It very well could be. That is a theory that's happened. I don't know if it's very popularized though, because it's just the name Charlotte. I remember when people first read this story, and everyone was saying like, "Oh yeah, Charlotte doesn't like Charlotte can't have chocolate. She's allergic to chocolate. That's probably why she was stood outside in the puppet mini game. Give gifts, give life. No, not give gifts, give life. Take cake to the children. That's probably why she stood outside, because she's allergic to chocolate and she ran away." Yeah, no, I don't know. I don't know about that. "It's going great," Aunt Gigi said, casting a sideways look at Alec, who simply shrugged. Actually, it was going great. His sister was once again recognisable to their parents. The party only had an hour left until things were to wind down, and no one had gone injured or poisoned. All in all, a notable success. Except, it wasn't a success. Alec hadn't been able to play his trump card yet, and he hadn't been able to play it because Hazel wasn't playing her part anymore. She'd done everything, played skee-ball, fought zombies in the virtual reality battleground, shot about 1 million baskets, watched 2 full performances of the Freddy Fazbear Band. Yet every time the party prepper had come into the room trying to convince her to head over to the wind tunnel to snag the coupon for her prize, she found a reason not to go in. Instead, she'd look toward Alec as though in some sort of silent standoff to say to the party prepper, "I don't know if I want to do that anymore." "But honey, that's all you've been talking about for weeks, is trying to win the Yarg Foxy," their mum would say. But every time she would blow the party prepper off and run away to play some other game with her friends. Aunt Gigi shrugged. Maybe she doesn't want it anymore. Kids are fickle. Alec had been so prepared. He'd snuck away when nobody was looking. He'd sifted through 3 full buckets of coupons, tickets, and confetti that clung to him like spiderwebs, until at last he'd found a single Yarg Foxy ticket in the materials meant for the wind tunnel. He'd pocketed the coupon and gone about his sulking away, and no one was the wiser. But if Hazel wasn't going to take her turn in the wind tunnel, it was all for nothing. Alec realised if he was going to expose her for the brat she was, he was going to have to take a more active role than he had been taking. "Maybe she's afraid of being disappointed," he said to his mum, and his mum seemed to think that was a pretty reasonable idea. "Alec, you two have been getting along so famously lately. Maybe you should try to convince her. I'm just afraid she's going to leave today and regret not even trying." "Sure thing, Mum," Alec said, laying it on a little thick. But it fooled his mum, and she nodded approvingly as she headed to the arcade to fetch his sister. He found her by the whack-a-mole tables. "Oh, Hazel, a word," he said, pulling her by the elbow with a sappy smile while her friends distracted themselves. He found himself standing once again in the aisle between the Freddy Fazbear stage and the arcade. Only this time, there was no creepy bear to stare blankly off into the distance. The platform and the bear had been removed, leaving only an impression on the carpet in front of the pillar. "What gives?" Alex said once they were out of earshot. "What do you mean?" she actually had the nerve to say, squirming out of his grip, while she looked back to wave to her friends. "I mean, you're going back to being perfect little Hazel, and Mum and Dad are catching on," he said, hoping she'd take the bait. "What are you on about? Mum and Dad are thrilled. Everything's back to normal." She seemed mad at him for some reason, and he wondered for a second if she'd figured his plan out to expose her as a phony, which is maybe why he'd played his hand a little too aggressively. "You know, the party's almost over. You're going to go home without your stupid toy if you don't get in that wind tunnel." She shrugged, looking down. Her freckles practically disappeared under her flushed cheeks. "Maybe I don't need the toy anymore," she said. "Of course you do," he said, unleashing the full magnitude of his anger. She was clearly doing everything she could to push him to his limit. "You're not going to get everything you want forever. Soon, you're going to get older, and you won't be so precious, and then who's going to like you?" In all of her 10 years, outside of the infant months, Alec had never seen his sister cry. Maybe she had thrown a fit or two when she was a toddler, but he'd always found better places to be when that sort of drama went down. But in that moment, for reasons he couldn't begin to understand, he watched as her light green eyes rippled with tears, and though she wouldn't let him spill to her cheeks, he could tell it was a monumental effort on her part to keep them in. "Fine," she said, and not a word more. She shoved past him and walked straight through her crowd of friends in the arcade toward the party room, greeting her mom and dad and aunt with nary a smile before demanding to be let into the wind tunnel. Oh yes, okay," their mum said, not the enthusiasm she'd been counting on, but she was quick to take action. "She's ready for the wind tunnel," she called out to the Freddy staff like they were her ladies in waiting. 2 employees prepped the chamber by emptying the buckets of game tickets and coupons and sticky cellophane confetti into the top of the tube before flipping a switch to activate a strobe light that couldn't be looked at for too long without causing a touch of nausea. Another flip of a switch and the wind in the tunnel was activated, sending the assortment of paper and mylar whirring through the tube, mixing up the prize coupons in a dizzying frenzy. They switched the machine off again, then rather unceremoniously grabbed Hazel by the wrists and pulled her through the little entrance door to the tube. The strobe lights reactivated, and as moths to a flickering flame, her friends migrated from their arcade back into the party room to witness the birthday girl's tornado of potential prizes. "Are you ready?" asked an employee. Hazel simply nodded, and Alec watched with measured awe as the storm kicked up around her, whipping her golden curls in front of her face and momentarily obscuring her behind the chaos. Grab the tickets, her friends screamed from behind Alec. Oh, the Yarg Foxy coupon. It's right there, baby, it's right there, his mum hollered, jumping up and down as though that could help, but Alec knew better. He touched the side of his jeans pocket where the single crinkled Yarg Foxy coupon resided. Hazel barely reacted to the screams, though. She held her hands out haphazardly, making minimal attempts to grasp at any of the frenzied papers that flitted in and out of her fingers. "Is she okay?" their dad asked, squinting into the chaos of the tube. "You don't think she's going to puke, do you?" "Oh boy, that would be a mess," Aunt Gigi said, and Alec had to stifle a snort. "Come on, Hazel," he shouted above the crowd, pretending to cheer along with them. "Get that certificate! Get that fox!" But it was no use. Either she couldn't hear, or she simply didn't care. When the wind tunnel timer buzzed, Freddy Fazbear Associates dutifully pulled the plug, and the storm inside the enclosure came to an abrupt end. "Okay, boys and girls," the employee shouted into a microphone. "Let's see what the birthday girl has won." Kids from the party pushed and shoved toward the cylinder with Hazel inside it, and she sidestepped their greedy hands as they snatched the free tickets like they were actual dollar bills. "Well, Hannah, what do we got?" said the employee. "It's Hazel," Aunt Gigi corrected. "Okay," said the employee, ignoring Aunt Gigi and stepping dramatically over to Hazel as she cast him a wary look. "Let's see here." She handed him all the papers she had reluctantly grasped against her body, allowing him to sift through the various coupons and announce each one like she'd won the lottery. "1 free fountain drink, a bonus round at the Skydunk, make that 2 promotional Freddy Fazbear character cups." As the employee came to the end of the stack Hazel had captured, their mother started to shift nervously. "She didn't get the fox," Alec heard her fret to their dad. "Meg, relax. She doesn't even want it anymore." "Yes, she does, Ian. She's just trying to be a big girl." "Well, Hannah, that's quite a haul," the employee said once he'd read off the prizes. "Hazel!" Aunt Gigi yelled, and this time the announcer looked over his shoulder long enough to cast her a sidelong glance. "Hazel!" he corrected, grimacing at Aunt Gigi, who smiled her fakest smile back. "Wait!" screamed the girl named Charlotte, who couldn't eat chocolate. "Look in her hair!" Sure enough, as her friend spun her to the side, Hazel's curls cradled a small glittery ticket that looked different than any of the others she'd managed to capture in the round. But Alec recognized it immediately. "It's the Yarg Foxy! It's the Yarg Foxy!" screamed Charlotte. "It's not possible," Alec thought. Anger burbled in the pit of his stomach and began to churn, ready to erupt at any second. He remembered the tube before the wind tunnel had turned on. There had been little scraps in there from the last round, and in that small pile of glittery confetti and tickets a single Yarg Foxy coupon must have been hiding, waiting to be kicked up again by a renewed wind. Alec was certain she hadn't meant for it to, but Hazel's face completely transitioned. It was only for a fraction of a second, but he was looking at her at the right time. And in that second, he saw her utter relief at having won the prize she was determined not to want when the day came to it. And no one would get to see the epic tantrum of Golden Hazel, the girl who had everything but didn't get the fox. That's right, boys and girls, Hazel has won her very own Yarg Foxy, the announcer cried, and the kids from the party practically went into convulsions. They followed the employee all the way to the prize counter and swarmed him as he lifted the boxed Yarg Foxy from the highest shelf, bestowing it upon Hazel like she'd just been crowned the queen. "What a relief," their mom sighed, falling back into a chair. Alec looked at her like she'd just grown a second head. "A relief? It's a joke," he said, and she scowled at Alec. How can you say that? You knew how much she wanted that toy. Does it look like she still wants the stupid toy? He groused, still furious that Hazel was doing all she could to hide the fact that she was the spoiled one. Alec watched as she unboxed the fox and held it in her hands, smiling at it like it was some sort of long-forgotten treasure. Let me see, her friends begged, but Hazel smiled shyly and shook her head. Honey, why don't you want to play with it? Their dad asked, and Hazel simply demurred. It wasn't until her friends had lost interest and migrated back toward the arcade that their mum finally pulled Hazel aside. Sweetie, what is it? Don't you want the fox anymore? She asked, and Alec had just about had all that he could take. Of course not. She gets everything she wants, and she's still not satisfied. But isn't it sad that Hazel doesn't want the fox anymore? Alec bellowed. He mocked, he sneered, but no one was listening. That's when Hazel excused herself for a long while. It had to have been at least 10 minutes. I told you she was going to throw up, their dad said. I'll go check on her. But just as she was headed to the back room where Hazel had disappeared, she reappeared with the fox, still clutching it in her hands like it was suddenly very important to her after all. Hazel, sweetie, you feeling okay? Their mum asked, stroking Hazel's curls, and suddenly Hazel didn't look so glum or distracted or nauseous to hear their dad tell it. Instead, she leaned into her mum and whispered something that made her mum practically melt into a light puddle, right there on the Freddy Fazbear's floor. Then their mum did something unexpected. Alec, come here, hun, she said, and Alec eyed them both suspiciously. To be fair, so did their dad and Aunt Gigi. Just come here, their mum said, rolling her eyes, but she was still smiling. Alec approached his mum and sister with caution. He had the distinct impression he was walking into a trap. Go on, Hazel. Tell him what you told me, their mum said. Hazel looked mortified. Her face was practically buried in the plush fox. Look at you, shy as ever. Okay, I'll just be right over there, their mum cooed, and Alec was about to climb out of his skin. What the heck are you doing? He whispered through gritted teeth. He was so close to beating his sister at her own game. No, his own game. This was his to win. Nothing, she said. I don't want to do this anymore. Do what? Alex said, growing nervous. He looked up at his parents, but it didn't appear they'd heard anything. I don't want to pretend to be bad anymore. It was just to get you to like me. Alec was speechless. Huh? Here, she said, and shoved the Yarg Foxy into his chest. It's for you. Aw, sweetie, look, their mum said, and their dad shushed her. But their parents and Aunt Gigi continued to stare. You can't be serious, Alex said. I only wanted it so I could give it to you, she said. What the heck am I going to do with the stupid fox? He asked. No, he demanded. This was all just too much. How had she so expertly bested him? I wanted you to stop hating me so much. Just take it, okay? She said, and shoved it into his chest. None of this was working out the way it was supposed to. She was supposed to miss out on the fox, throw the epic fit he just knew she'd been storing up inside all week, and when his parents and all her friends saw her for the spoiled brat she really was, life should have gone back to the way Alec had enjoyed it before, with him to act in relative obscurity without the burden of Golden Hazel's constant goodness. But now, she had the fox, and what was she doing? She was giving it to him. In an act of utter sainthood, she was giving her most prized possession to him. She's won it for him, because she knew how much he'd always wanted one. She'd just checkmated. No, he said, flinging the fox back at her. No, I don't want it. Alec, what sort of way is that to act toward your sister? She's giving you her gift on her birthday, their mum cried. She's such a phony! Can't you people see that? She's the worst kind of spoiled. Bratty fake. How can you not see that? Alec was ranting now. It was all he could do to keep his head from spinning on his neck, exorcist style. You want me to take the fox? He said, and he could only guess by the way his mother looked at him that he looked positively maniacal. Okay, fine. I'll take the fox. He ripped the toy back from his sister's grasp hard enough to tear the arm, sending soft tufts of stuffing floating into the air. Their mother let out an involuntary shriek, and Aunt Gigi put her hand on her sister's shoulder. "Meg, get a grip. You're making it worse." Their dad tried to make it better. "Alec, come on, sport. Don't do this today." "Oh, I see. Because it's so it's so predictable that Alec would ruin the party. It's so inevitable that Alec would spoil perfect little Hazel's good time," he said, snarling at his family, who could only look back at him in horror. All of them, that is, except for Hazel. Hazel simply stood there, arms limp at her sides, as she stared at him. And there they were, the tears. So I'm sorry to bring this up at such like a big moment in the story, but I find it funny we were talking about Golden Hazel and Golden Freddy before, and here we're saying arms limp at her sides. That's quite interesting. She hadn't let them fall earlier. She had saved it all up for that moment, when she had the perfect audience. That's when she let the floodgates open, and even still, she only let out a few. "I can't take it anymore," Alec raged, and carried by the wind of the truly possessed, he fled the scene of his worst crime yet. He'd brought the whole party crashing down around him, just as they'd predicted he would. He'd done his very best to get the better of his sister, and in the end she'd still won. And if that wasn't enough, she'd actually made him believe, for the briefest moment, that she was really as good as she pretended to be. And that is what she'd wanted, and that she'd wanted to be his friend. Pounding a path through the pizzeria, Alec whizzed past confusing-looking staff and his sister's gang of friends and one or two lonely Freddy bears, barely registering any of it, including Hazel's friend Charlotte, who was about to puke because someone had ignored all warnings to the contrary and fed her chocolate. He didn't stop running until he pushed himself through at least 3 sets of doors and left the cacophony of kids and games and bells, more like, and singing behind him. He was somewhere in the cramped maze of backrooms that made up the inner workings of Freddy Fazbear's family pizzeria. Oh boy, you don't want to be back there, my friend. Don't know what year it is, but it sounds like it's probably not the year for this sort of activity. He slowed to a walk as he tried to catch his breath, but it wasn't until he'd come to a complete standstill that he realised why it was he couldn't seem to exhale. It was because he kept gulping air in. It was because he was sobbing, just like a little kid, just like a spoiled brat. He backed against the wall and threw his shoulders against it, once and then again, tucking his chin to his chest as he let his shoulders absorb all the shock. "It's not my fault," he said again and again. "It's not my fault." But the more he heard his pathetic words in his ears, the more he knew they weren't true. It was his fault, all of it. He'd ruined the party, ruined Hazel, ruined his whole 15 years by believing everyone was out to get him. He closed his eyes as he threw his shoulders again and again against the wall as he pictured Hazel's watery eyes, the lines creasing his mum's forehead, his dad's head shaking in disappointment. Finally, he'd tired himself out enough to stop slamming against the wall, only to realise it wasn't a wall at all. It was a door. And what he'd thought was the sound of his own tantrum was actually a sound coming from the other side of the door, something that sounded like a loud thumping. Pressing his head against the door for a closer listen, he looked up and down the hallway to make sure no one was coming, before he ducked into the room with the strange sound. The light switch was deep inside the room to his right, and he had to walk several steps in the dark, groping the wall, until he finally found it, the door having closed with a heavy thunk after he'd stepped inside. When the room was finally lit, he saw it was something of a storage room, only far more cluttered with what appeared to be abandoned toys, arcade games, and machinery than the extra stocks of napkins and paper cups he was expecting. The back wall was lined with long dormant arcade games Alec could remember being popular 10 or so years ago. 10 or so years ago? Interesting. So this could be in the 90s? Huh? I don't know. Folded cafeteria-style tables were stacked in rows against the side wall, their attached circular seats giving the arrangement a look like dominoes. The wall closest to him consisted of rows of wire racks, each holding various broken or dated toys that might once have been part of the prize counter display. Now the cluttered shelves of sad, ownerless toys looked less like prizes and more like the stuff that goes missing under kids' beds. He slumped into one of the seats of the cafeteria table that had fallen from its place against the wall. His nose was still running from his meltdown in the hallway. And when he lifted his hand to drag it across his face, he felt a tickle of plush and remembered he was still holding the fox. Its torn arm dangled by a few stubborn threads. Otherwise, the toy was shiny new, just as it had been promised to the kid lucky enough to get that stupid coupon. "You weren't even supposed to be here," he said to the fox, but he couldn't muster the rage to give the words any bite. He was all angered out. In fact, he could hardly feel anything but shame of having failed so miserably to show his sister up. Her words rang in his ears. "I wanted you to stop hating me so much." This couldn't be it. This couldn't be what his sister had wanted this whole time. To win a toy he'd never gotten because good kids earned 10,000 ticket prizes and bad kids got followed around by a bear for a friend. Alec held his head in his hands, hoping his mind would still. But memories of his sister came rushing back, crawling through the skull and ping-ponging off the insides of his brain like a dated arcade game. What? Pong? Is that what it's called? No, it's not called Pong. Yeah, it is called Pong, I think. I can't remember. I'm really stupid. Let's just remember that conversation. Let's just forget that conversation. That never happened. The pictures she would draw for him and randomly slip under the crack of the bathroom door. The dumb jokes he'd make that only she would laugh at. These are examples of, the last piece of pumpkin pie she would never eat at Thanksgiving because she knew it was his favourite. There were all the moments over the past week, times when she thought she'd been one-upping him, trying to outdo his cunning, times when he'd thought he caught her looking at him, but couldn't figure out what she was thinking. He'd just assumed she was scheming. But what if she was just looking? What if she was just waiting for him to look back at her? What if she was just waiting for him to be a big brother? Alec could barely form a cognate thought. Oh, a cogent thought? I don't know. Cogent. It seemed impossible that he'd gotten it all so wrong. The attention his parents lavished on her and spared for him. The bad seed label he'd given himself that he was so certain the family had given him. The days and months and years he'd spent lamenting his outsiderness. What if they'd all actually wanted him inside with the rest of them? He thought about what Hazel told him the other day, how she'd seemed so upset and he couldn't figure out why. "I bet you didn't even know that we moved here for you," she was trying to tell him, to get him to understand. "I wanted you to stop hating me so much." Alec couldn't control himself. He clutched the pirate fox, squeezing the life it didn't have out of it before throwing it as hard as he could into the shelves beside him, knocking a bin of outdated, unwanted toys to the floor right along with the brand new Yarg Foxy with the torn arm. All the toys fell in a collective heap to the floor, spilling across the dusty grounds in various thumps and squeaks. "Great," Alex said. "Just fantastic." It wasn't enough he'd ruined the party and hurt Hazel, but now he was going to get in trouble for trashing the back room of Freddy Fazbear's. He ducked behind the shelving rack and began sifting through the toys, throwing them back into the bin they fell out of, while doing his best to locate the fox. After everything he'd already done, losing the toy she gave to him just wasn't an option, not if he ever had any hope of making things right. But finding the Yarg Foxy proved to be a harder task than he'd thought it would be. There were rubber ducks and plastic snakes and felt puppets, but there was no peg-legged fox with a tragically torn arm. "Come on, seriously?" Alex said, exasperated and utterly exhausted by this time. All he wanted was for this horrible day to be over with. Alec was so lost in the sea of toys that he forgot about the thumping, the strange sound he'd heard on the other side of the door before pushing his way in. He hadn't heard it again since opening the door, but the thumping was back now, echoing from some part of the room he couldn't see. Now that he was behind the shelving unit, though, he could tell that the sound was coming from somewhere close by. He peered into the far corner of the room, in a cluttered area behind the very last shelving unit lining the wall. There, tucked into a shadowy corner, was a large green dumpster-type container, a padlock sealing the lid shut. Alec took a few slow steps closer to the dumpster, hoping beyond hope that the thumping wasn't coming from inside that bin. Now, beside the bin, he hadn't heard any more thumping for the last several seconds, and he was mostly satisfied that he'd been mistaken. Clearly, the thumping had to be coming from the other side of the wall the dumpster leaned against. But just as Alec slid his fingers underneath the lid to peek through the crack allowed by the lock, the bin rattled and thumped, and he stumbled backwards, scooting far away from the container as he could get. His heart pounded hard enough in his chest that he thought it might explode, but when nothing crawled out from under the crack in the lid, his pulse eventually began to slow to a normal pace. Rats. It had to be rats, or some other sort of vermin. Glad I didn't eat the pizza, he said to himself, and felt his stomach turn. Leaning on his elbows, Alec found himself wedged between the wall and the farthest shelving unit from the door, buried behind a sea of forgotten things. And there, staring at him from underneath a colourful canopy like something he might have seen in a circus, was a lonely Freddy bear, just like the one he'd seen staring into nowhere that day he argued with Hazel. Sorry, I'm messing up loads. You again, he said to it. You being punished or something? But he immediately disliked the thought of the already unsettling bear having misbehaved. He stared at the bear as it stood at attention on its platform under the canopy, seeming to gaze at something just over Alec's shoulder. Alec turned and looked at the green dumpster behind him, but when he turned back around, he was startled to find that the lonely Freddy's eyes had somehow shifted. They seemed to be looking right at Alec. I've been waiting for you, friend. I don't know why I gave him that accent. Okay, now he's like sexy French, okay? I've been waiting for you, friend, the bear said. Alex stopped and stared at the bear. That's great, he said to it, and that should have been the end of it. Alec didn't expect it to say anything else. We should be best friends. What? Alex said, looking a little harder at the bear. Was this how it was supposed to work? He thought it was supposed to be sort of interviewing him. But the bear wasn't asking him questions so much as it was telling him things. Very best friends, said the bear. Okay, Alex said, trying to brush off the chill that kept running up his arm. It's a stuffed animal, he said to himself. It's a stupid toy. But it was strange that no matter how many times he tried, Alec couldn't seem to stand up. He couldn't seem to look away from the bear. All he could do was sit there and stare as it stared back. Alec had never noticed the bear's eyes before. Had they always been that blue? And if he didn't know better, he'd think they were almost glowing. But that was crazy. Then it started to ask him questions. What's your favourite colour? My favourite colour? Alec asked, almost as if he wasn't in control of his own voice anymore. My favourite colour is green. The bear moved immediately to the next question. Wasn't it supposed to share things about it too? What's your favourite food? Lasagna, said Alec, his answer automatic and immediate. What do you want to be when you grow up? A pro skateboarder. What's your best subject in school? History. It went on like that for what felt to Alec like hours, but it couldn't possibly have been that long. He was having such a hard time feeling the floor underneath him or the sensation in his fingers. It felt like he was floating, like he was hearing every question drift to him from the end of a long tunnel. Then the bear's questions took a different turn. Who do you admire the most? My Aunt Gigi. What do you fear the most? The dark. What would you do if you were asked to hurt someone you love? It felt like the bear was reaching its soft, plush paw into his very soul and extracting the answers he kept the most hidden, and it was doing it so effortlessly. Its eyes were as blue and deep as an ocean trench. What's your biggest regret? And at this question, Alec did stop. He resisted at first, or maybe he simply didn't know the answer, but the bear wouldn't move on. It asked again, what's your biggest regret? Still, Alec hesitated, and the pull from inside of him began to grow painful, like something was squeezing him from his very core. What is your biggest regret, Alec? With the pressure building from inside, he could barely breathe against the pain, and through the tiny spaces in the gritted teeth, the answer trickled out. Hurting Hazel. The pressure eased, and sensation eventually returned to Alec's body, warming his extremities all the way to the middle of him. But when his body breathed back to life, something felt fundamentally different. He stared hard into the blue eyes that had burned through his soul, and he searched for answers of his own. But he only came away with more questions because the blue eyes of the bear had suddenly turned light green. "What's happening?" he tried to ask the bear. Because suddenly, the bear seemed to be the one with all the answers, but Alec couldn't open his mouth. He stared, and the bear simply stared back. A panicky feeling began to rise in his chest. "I just need to get outside," he thought. "I need some air." But breathing wasn't his problem. Moving was. He tried to extend his leg to stand, but nothing happened. He wanted to push his palm to the floor to brace himself, but he couldn't. Voices, faint at first but growing louder as they approached, gave him a touch of renewed hope. He recognized them immediately. "Mom! Hazel!" he called out, or at least he tried, but every time he felt his throat flex to yell, the words struggled to find their way out. "Don't worry, sweetie, we'll find it," he could hear his mum say. The thumping from the giant bin behind him kicked up again, and he wanted so badly to move away from it, but nothing was working. Every muscle suddenly felt crystallized. "Did you hear that?" Alec heard Hazel say from the other side of the door. "Yes!" screamed Alec. In here! Look in here!" He could hear the door open from the other side of the room, but he couldn't see around the shelving unit. All he could see was the bear, as its newly green eyes bore through him. "I don't think we're supposed to be in here," Alec's mum said, and he thought he'd never been more relieved to hear her voice. "Mom, look!" said Hazel. For a second, Alec's heart leapt. They'd spotted him. He couldn't see them, but maybe they saw him. "But what if I'm having some sort of seizure?" he thought. No matter though. His mom and his sister were here to help now. Except, why weren't they talking to him? Why hadn't they come around the side of the shelving unit? "Ah, see?" his mom said. "I told you we'd find it." "But you haven't found me," Alec tried desperately to scream. I'm right here! The thumping from the bin had gone silent the moment the door opened. And why now? Why couldn't the noise pick up again? Now! "He just threw it in here," Hazel said, and the pain in her voice was enough to make Alec feel like the smallest, most disgusting cockroach. "Hazel," their mum said, her voice so gentle, "he loves you. I know he does. In his own way. He really does love you. Just like we love him." Alec's throat tightened into a knot. And this was the moment. This was finally the moment he would tell them how sorry he was, how wrong he was, how much he'd missed out on by wanting so badly to believe he was on the outside. Now all he felt was that he was somehow trapped. Inside. "Come on, sweets. The party's gonna wrap up soon. Let's go polish off that cake, shall we?" "Hang on," Hazel said. "Please see me," Alec silently pleaded. "See me." "Oh, don't worry about the arm, hun. I can fix that when we get home," said their mum. Then he heard the worst sound. He heard Hazel choke on a sob. "Oh, honey," their mum said. "He hates me," said Hazel. "He doesn't hate you. He's never hated you." That was the thing, though. Alec had hated her. It was the worst, most awful confession he's ever made, but he didn't have to, because his sister had known all along. What she didn't know, what he hadn't told her when he should have, was that he didn't hate her anymore. If he was telling his own deepest, darkest secret, he'd have told her that he hated himself far more than he ever hated her. And he'd liked himself more this past week than he had since the day she was born, and it was because he'd spent it plotting with her. "Come on," their mum said, and he could practically hear her squeezing Hazel's shoulder. "This will blow over. These things always do. Let's not let it ruin your birthday." "No! No!" Alec tried to scream. "Don't leave me! I can't move!" But it was no use. No matter how loud the voice was in his head, he couldn't push the sound from his throat. Panic was rising at the base of his skull, and he was beginning to wonder what would happen if nobody came back here to look for him. Would they simply go home without him? Would anyone even miss him? Alex stared hard into the now green eyes of the bear and mustered every ounce of strength he could find in his core. It seemed to take everything he had, but suddenly the bear before him was gone, hiding on the other side of Alex's closed eyes. He'd figured out how to close his eyes. Good. Now breathe. Just count to 10 and keep breathing, he told himself. He pulled a deep breath in through his nose, out through his mouth, and repeated the exercise 10 times. And just as he reached the 10th exhale, he felt the tips of his fingers twitch. He was so excited. He opened his eyes and he was stunned to find himself very much alone behind the shelving unit. The bear was gone, its custom platform empty. Where? But he didn't have time to think about that right now. He had just regained the tiniest bit of movement in his fingertips, and he wasn't about to stop there. He closed his eyes once again and repeated the breathing, hoping it would do the trick again. Sure enough, as he reached 10, he found with great relief that he was able to wiggle his big toe. He repeated the exercise over and over, reteaching his body how to move, and pretty soon he could bend his knees and his elbows and even turn his head. The thumping in the bin behind him started up again, and he was suddenly furious that the sound returned now when it was too late to do him any good. Oh, shut up. Unfortunately, even though his limbs had begun to cooperate, his voice still hadn't returned, nor had his ability to even open his mouth. No time to worry about that now, though, he thought. He was starting to feel his motor function come back online, perhaps a bit clumsily, but so long as he could eventually get himself to stand. That's all that really mattered. Surely once his parents and Aunt Gigi saw him, they'd see he was in need of help. He simply had to get out of this back room. It seemed like he had to squeeze every muscle in his body in order to get his feet under him. He continued to close his eyes and breathe, taking encouragement from the small victories. Leg bent, leg tucked, body balanced, other leg bent, and though it took forever, at long last, he managed to stand straight on the two legs. The strangest thing, though, was that it almost seemed like he was still sitting. The shelf seemed so much higher than it had initially. In fact, the entire room looked bigger somehow, like the ceiling had risen. He moved stiffly at first, his legs jerking more than walking, and he had to work extraordinarily hard to get control of them. But after several steps and as many pauses, Alec managed to find a rhythm adequate enough to move him to the other end of the room. But when he came upon the door, he was stunned to find that he couldn't reach the handle. It was at least a foot above his head. What? Using the same practice he'd employed to get his legs working, he closed his eyes and took several deep breaths, and eventually he was able to raise his hands high enough over his head to wiggle the handle of the door. He pushed through the door, managing to nudge the handle enough to open it, and when he stumbled into the hallway, Alec again had to do a double take to make sure he was in the right place to find his way back to the restaurant. The hallway was much longer than it had been before. It seemed almost endless, and he felt so small inside of it. But Alec pushed on. He only had to get to the back of the party room. He only had to make his way to the family. They would know what was wrong. They would know how to help him. The end of the hallway was blocked by yet another door he had remembered being much less of an obstacle. The handle was even higher here than it had been in the storage room, and no matter how high he stretched his hands into the air, he couldn't reach the lever that would let him back into the restaurant. Don't panic, he told himself. Someone is bound to come back here at some point. He had to wait a lot longer than he thought he would. Slumped against the wall to the side of the door, Alec tried not to let his mind wander too far. He was afraid he'd slip into the trance he'd somehow fallen into in the storage room. The way the bear had gone into his head. There was nothing natural about it. He wasn't sure what or how, but something had happened to him, something horrible. He just hoped it wasn't irreversible. He hoped a lot of what happened today could be reversed. All of a sudden, the door swung wide, nearly crushing Alec behind it, and he had to throw himself through the opening before the door slammed shut again. Nose on the floor of the Freddy Fazbear carpet, he was again surrounded by the piercing screams and jangling game bells of the arcade. The second Alec landed on the floor, he felt the wind knocked squarely out of him. "Goal!" he heard someone call, and then he heard others laugh. But that was all as he soared through the air, still trying to find his breath. He landed with a painful thud, this time face up and staring at the etched glass lampshades that covered each of the tables in the pizzeria. Feet pounded all around him, dangerously close to his head, and he winced as sneaker after sneaker narrowly missed, squashing some part of him. Why is everyone acting like they don't see me? No sooner had the thought occurred to him that he was grabbed roughly by the arm and clutched tightly into an itchy wool vest. "I saw it first," said a voice, and suddenly someone was tugging hard on his leg. "No, I called dibs," said the kid holding him. And how big were these kids that they were able to play tug-of-war with him? "No, me!" "Me!" His leg was being pulled so hard he was terrified it might come off any second. He wanted to go back to not being seen. Then, just as quickly as the tug-of-war had started, a voice in the distance yelled, "Pizza's here!" and he was again dropped into the carpet. He lay there on his side, trying to recover himself, but a stroller wheel wobbled straight for his head, and he squeezed his eyes shut as he awaited certain death. "Jacob, move that thing out of the way, would you?" said the person behind the stroller, and someone nudged Alec with their foot, wedging him against the baseboard. Move that thing? Alec thought, and if he weren't so out of his mind confused and in a fair amount of pain, he might have been offended. He managed to brace himself against the wall and get to his feet, but he was so wobbly, he wasn't sure he'd be able to make it across the room without falling over. Still, he was determined. He had to make it back to the party room. He just had to make it back to his family. Surely they'd be looking for him by now, wouldn't they? Alec wobbled and weaved across the eatery, dodging stomping feet and spilled colas, getting sprinkled with parmesan and crushed peppers from the tableside shakers. After several near-death experiences, Alec found his way to the other side of the cavernous room amid the throngs of kids and families. As he rounded the corner, he spied the enormous cylindrical tube that made up the wind tunnel, now dormant and awaiting the next birthday kid once Hazel's party was over. Then there was his family. His mom in her dark jeans and his dad in the comfiest corduroy slacks and his flannel shirt. Aunt Gigi with her hair pulled back in her headband. And there was Hazel, her blonde ringlets hanging in front of her face, but still not obscuring that smile that couldn't help but light up the room. Her friends were leaning back in their chairs, rubbing their full bellies and riffling through the goodie bags as they waited for their parents to pick them up. They all looked so happy. Hazel especially beamed. It was like someone had switched the light on inside of her again. She was all at once relieved of the burden Alec had placed on her by being himself. Except not the self he wanted to be. Not anymore. He wanted to be the reason she would smile like that more often. He was ready. That's when Alec saw that, in fact, he was the reason she was beaming. There, sitting across the table from his sister and their parents, was Alec. It was the same rumpled t-shirt he'd thrown on that morning before the party, the same ripped jeans, the same unruly golden curls that provided the counterbalance to Hazel's perfect ringlets. It was his light green eyes, his slightly crooked teeth, his lanky limbs, and he was smiling right back at Hazel. "Hey," Alex said, the voice in his head quiet at first, but quickly it was screaming, "Hey, that's not me! That's not me!" But anyone looking at the kid across from Hazel would beg to differ. In every way, this person was most certainly him. Those questioning it might point to the fact that he wasn't sulking like the Alec they knew. He wasn't glowering at her sister the way he was known to do more often than not. But he had seemed to be making an effort all week to turn over a new leaf, hadn't he? His parents had been trying this new technique, a method endorsed by a reputable doctor and the best-selling author. Some kids just took longer to come into their own. Wasn't it nice that Alec had managed to do just that? And on his sister's birthday of all days, how sweet, how perfect. What a family they were turning out to be. Alec forced his stiff legs forward and tumbled into the party room, but he could barely see above the table when he got inside. He thought maybe he could try climbing on one of the table legs, but it was too slick. He moved from kid to kid, crowding around the table, doing whatever he could to attract the attention of just one of them. He had to get on top of that table. He had to look into his mom's eyes. She'd have to recognize him then, wouldn't she? Of course she would. "Look down! Someone, please just look down!" his mind screamed. But just as before, his throat refused to release his pleas. It's a bad dream. This has to be some crazy, elaborate nightmare. But it didn't feel like a nightmare. In fact, nothing had ever felt more real in his entire 15 years. He spied the girl called Charlotte, sitting curled up in a chair in the corner, clutching her stomach. She was the only kid not talking to someone else. She was his best chance at attracting attention. But as he waved his arms to try and flag her interest, she turned suddenly and spewed all over his head, warm vomit dripping into his eyes and running down his face. Oh no, Charlotte, honey, is your stomach still bothering you? I don't know what it is about this story and focusing on this Charlotte character who is allergic to chocolate, but it's really funny that she just keeps popping up. Anyway, Alec could barely see through the puke pouring in rivers over his eyes, but the sound of his mum's voice was such a relief. In a minute, this whole insane day would come to an end, and he'd be able to rejoin his family. Oh, gross, someone shouted, and to his horror, it was his own sister. She puked on one of the bears. Wait, what? Hold on, I'll get one of the staff to come and clean it up, their dad said. Here, let me help, Aunt Gigi said, and he watched from his periphery as beautiful, wonderful Aunt Gigi hurried to his corner of the room. Thank you, he whimpered in his head. His Aunt Gigi would know what to do. But instead of coming to Alec's aid, Aunt Gigi gently pulled Charlotte from her chair and sat her on the bench closer to Hazel and the fake Alec, who passed napkins to her so she could clean herself up. Have some water, Hazel said, offering her a cup. Here, you got some in your hair, the fake Alec said. Then he turned to Alec. His eyes, his stolen green eyes in his stolen body, gleamed at Alec as he stood in the corner, dripping in vomit, watching his family welcome him into their fold. And then the fake Alec smiled. Yes, just over here. Sorry, I think we ruined one of your bears. Alec heard his dad say from the outside of the room, and just then a Freddy's employee arrived with a mop and a bucket. Not a problem, sir. We'll take care of this mess. You just go back to enjoying your party. And with that, Alec was tossed into a bucket and rolled away, his vision still obscured, but not too much that he didn't see the fake Alec wink at him from the table before returning his attention to a smiling, laughing Hazel with her smiling, happy family. In the bucket, Alec was quickly rolled to the back of the pizzeria once again, the doors he'd worked so hard to move thrust open and shut with ease by the employee. He made a quick stop in the men's room, where he shoved the wheeled bucket and mop into the corner and wrung out the rag in a maintenance sink before slopping it over the side of the bucket, flecking the mirror beside them with large droplets of water. Alec turned slowly to the mirror he only then realized was parked beside. There in the reflection stared a blue-eyed, 2-foot Freddy Fazbear, its hair matted and starting to crust over with puke, its arms extended and ready for a hug. This can't be. This can't possibly be. But Alec had no time to contemplate what it was and what it wasn't. Before he knew it, they were on the move again. The employee pinched Alec's paw between 2 fingers. Yick, he said, scrunching up his nose before holding Alec as far as in front of him as he could. Into the bin for you, he said. He kicked open the men's room door and travelled quickly down the hall to the storage room Alec had escaped to earlier. Wait, he tried to say. Wait! But as ever, it was no use. The employee pulled a collection of keys from a retractable cord on his belt loop as he made his way to the very back of the storage room toward a familiar large green dumpster. Which one is it? He muttered to himself before landing on the right one. Aha! Here it is. Then the employee stuck the key in the padlock over the bin's lid, and with a sharp turn to the left, the padlock sprang open. Have fun with your little buddies, he said, and released his pinch on Alec's paw, sending him falling through the air and into the bin. The light from the room illuminated his surroundings in the bin, long enough for Alec to see why it hadn't hurt when he fell in. His fall had been broken by dozens of plush bears that looked exactly like him. Dozens of discarded lonely Freddys. Nighty-night, the employee said, and just like that, the light above him extinguished with the closing and locking of the lid. Panic seeped into Alec's paws, or what might once have been paws. In his head he screamed and he screamed, but in the end, the only sound that crept from his unhinged, stuffed bear mouth was the tiniest squeak. "Help!" he thought he heard them say. Then he realised it hadn't been him at all. It had been the bear beside him in the bin. Then it was the bear on the other side of him. Pretty soon, it was every bear in the bin. Their thin, muted screams for help, swallowed by the metal and darkness that entombed them. Alec and his new friends. Dozens of the lonely ones. And that's it. If you're reading this or listening to this for the first time, I freaking love that ending. It's great, right? It gives you the chills. And I'll tell you, it gives you the chills every damn time. It's really, really good. And one thing, like, usually I would actually have Lonely Freddy. I've done a few tier list videos and like tier list podcasts and stuff. I would usually put Lonely Freddy relatively low down. Like I probably would put it like low B maybe. But rereading this, it's actually written really well. The only problem I really have with it is the fact that it kind of takes a while to get into the action. It's one of those stories where the ending kind of overpowers the rest of the story. But I mean, that's not all bad. Like I think that's okay. I think I just kind of forgot how long it takes to kind of get to this whole end bit. But still really, really good, really creepy. If you are unsure of what exactly happened, basically Alec runs away to the back room. There's like this soul swapping or body swapping that happens with the Lonely Freddy. So he becomes the Lonely Freddy, and the Lonely Freddy, whatever is going on there, that soul in the Lonely Freddy then became Alec, and then Alec was like the best version of himself or whatever. But then the real Alec, the bad Alec from before, was then in the Lonely Freddy, and now he's trapped in that bin with loads of other assumed victims to the Lonely Freddy, which is so creepy when you think about it. Like, there are so many Fazbear Frights is showing us all of the Fazbear Entertainment things that are going on behind the scenes of the horrible things that we already know are happening. Like, there's the missing children's incidents, there's the bites in the bite of 83, the bite of 87. There are other things happening in these games, and yet there are still loads of victims that we don't even hear about in the games because of these stories. And that's a crazy implication that this happens to more than one person. Because like, it would have been scary enough if it was just like Alec got thrown in the bin, the end. But it's the fact that Alec got thrown in the bin with dozens of other discarded Lonely Freddys. And Fazbear Entertainment know about it as well, because a Fazbear Entertainment employee was like 99, like it was mocking him. It was mocking it. He knew exactly what was going on. So I think that this is one of those stories which is very like theorizable, I guess. Because even reading that, I had a thought that I'd never had before, and that is, what if Hazel was actually swapped out at some point? I'm wondering if when they originally came to the pizzeria to like party plan and stuff, I wonder if Hazel was then swapped out there. But like, I don't think that would make sense. Or like Hazel was swapped out after the Yarg Foxy, because then she was like, then she completely changed. She I don't know. I don't know. But that's for you to think about, I guess. Anyway, oh yeah, there was also a lot of really cool foreshadowing, which I really wanted to say, but I didn't want to spoil it for you guys who haven't read this yet. But there was one point where, oh yeah, it's the fact that the entire first part of the story, the first act, I guess, is literally Alec and Hazel swapping personalities. And so that's kind of foreshadowing of what happens at the end, where Alec and Lonely Freddy completely swap, I guess, personalities. Yeah, because Alec ends up like, the fake Alec ends up good, and their family is going to live happily ever after, never knowing that the real Alec has been replaced. So, very creepy story. I really like it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. We are going to read Out of Stock at some point in like the next week, I think. It shouldn't take too long. But once we've done that, I have finished every single Fazbear Frights audiobook. So there is a podcast available on YouTube, on my YouTube channel. You can click on my channel and then go to podcasts, and every single Fazbear Frights story is going to be there. All of the Stitch Race stingers as well. And you can go and watch and listen to all of them. And then also Tales from the Pizzaplex audiobooks and stuff. I'm going to do the remaining ones of those that I haven't done that yet. But yeah, once we've done Out of Stock, that's all of the Fazbear Frights. So I'm going to be so excited for that. Anyway, thank you so much once again for listening and watching. Make sure you subscribe if you enjoyed, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.